Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the end of the semester. It's been another unusual one, I will say, as we all tried to find the right pace in our research and our teaching once again and help our students re-engage in our courses. As I invite Nick Russo to offer our invocation today, I ask that you continue to keep those in your prayers who are struggling with illness, especially our colleagues and our students. Nick?
Sarah, Matt, it's probably a mistake and a risk to ask somebody who studied liturgy at Notre Dame to offer the invocation. You're going to wind up getting deep cuts from the liturgical vinyls of antiquity. So this is St. Ephrem the Syrian's first hymn for the Nativity. This night bestowed peace upon the whole world, so let no one threaten. This is the night of the most gentle one, let no one be cruel. This is the night of the most humble one, let no one be proud. Now is the day of joy, let us not revenge. Now is the day of goodwill, let us not be mean-spirited. In this day of peace, let us not be conquered by anger. Today the bountiful impoverished himself for our sake, so rich one, invite the poor to your table. Today we received a gift for which we did not ask, so let us give alms to those in need. This present day cast open the heavenly door to our prayers. Let us open our door to those who ask our forgiveness. Now the divine being took upon himself the seal of humanity, in order for humanity to be adorned by the seal of divinity. Lord, bring peace, wisdom, and healing to a world in need. Comfort the afflicted, heal the suffering, disperse the arrogant, lift up the lowly, fill the hungry with good things. Through your birth, seal humanity with your divinity. We ask all this in Emmanuel, God with us, Christ our Lord. Amen.
Thank you, Nick. That's exactly why we invited a liturgical scholar to offer the invocation. As you all know, during this faculty meeting, we celebrate this year's winner of the Sheedy Award. It is the best arts and letters faculty meeting of the year because you don't have to listen to a dean's address. The Sheedy Excellence in Teaching Award is presented annually to an outstanding teacher in the College of Arts and Letters. The Sheedy Award was founded in 1970 in honor of Reverend Charles E. Sheedy, CSC, who served as dean of the college from 1951 to 1969. That's even longer than John McGreevy served. The award acknowledges a faculty member who has sustained excellence in research and instruction over a wide variety of courses. This individual must also motivate and enrich students using innovative and creative teaching methods and influence teaching and learning within the department, the college, and the university. Typically, last year's winner announces or introduces this year's award winner. This year will be no exception. I've invited 2020 Sheedy Award winner Pamela Wojcik to introduce this year's winner. Besides being the 2020 Sheedy Award winner, Pam is the department chairperson of the Department of Film, Television, and Theater, a professor and affiliated faculty with the Gender Studies program. She is the past president of the Society for Cinema and Media Studies, and her research focuses on American cinema, with particular interest in examining the ways in which film negotiates and interrogates issues of modernity, gender, and cultural change. Pam?
So last year when we did this, I said people would find it very strange to see the mask in the video, and I was hoping we would never see that again, but here we are. Anyway, I am delighted and honored to introduce this year's winner of the Sheedy Excellence in Teaching Award, Kathleen Sprows Cummings. Kathy became assistant professor in American Studies in 2008 after serving 7 years as associate and then acting director of the Cushwa Center for the Study of American Catholicism. She now directs the center and is the Reverend John A. O'Brien Collegiate Professor in History and American Studies. Kathy is a renowned expert on American Catholicism. She's published 2 important, well-received, prize-winning monographs, New Women of the Old Faith, Gender and American Catholic Identity in the Progressive Era, which came out in 2009, and A Saint of Our Own, How the Quest for a Holy Hero Helped Catholics Become American in 2019. She's also edited and co-edited numerous volumes about both the history of Catholicism and archival sources for the study of Catholicism. In addition to publishing frequently in peer-reviewed journals and books, she edits the American Catholic Newsletter, and as I'll discuss shortly, she's established herself as a crucial public intellectual who addresses vital questions of the day related to Catholicism in the public media. The Sheedy acknowledges Kathy's superb work as a scholar, but primarily recognizes her teaching. In the nomination materials for Kathy, she was described as, quote, committed to improving the lives of those around her by helping them to see the world in new ways. Student comments concur. One student said that Kathy's courses achieve exactly what the best courses at Notre Dame strive to do: make students question their own knowledge and try to look at a subject through a new lens. Another described themselves as having been a blind follower of the Catholic Church prior to taking Kathy's courses, but learned to question their automatic adherence so that they came to see both the beauty and the problems of the Church. Many of the students who commented had taken Kathy's USEM on Sanctity and Society, a course that analyzes how the Church chooses saints, considering how moral ideas change over time, and how those changes impact whom we deem to be heroes. The students all described the class as engaging, transformative, exciting, and eye-opening. Above that, they emphasized the way in which Kathy became a mentor to them, not only within the space of the course, but continuing across their Notre Dame career and beyond. Kathy's careful work with students, helping them learn how to write college papers, how to do research, made them feel confident and like they belonged here. They learned skills that they would use not only in other classes, but throughout their life. They described her as a mentor and a friend. Not only does she keep in touch with them, but she fosters relationships between and among them that they form a cohort that provides a touchstone for 4 years. These very passionate students were not American studies or history majors. They were business students, architects, gender studies majors, and more. Her mentorship at the Cushwa Center is also exemplary. There, she mentors postdocs, acculturating them into the profession by helping them develop their research, plan conferences, and prepare for the job market. The topics of Kathy's courses are deeply relevant to the lives of our students. The course on Sanctity and Society asks them to unpack their own ideals and select someone for sainthood, thinking carefully about what they value and why. The very popular large lecture course, Notre Dame in America, examines the university as a physical location, a social institution, and an imaginary construct. This course is not boosterism, but instead provides a deep dive into the history of the university, examining, for example, archival letters of Father Sorens that attest to his deep interest in local indigenous culture, an aspect often overlooked in accounts of the Fighting Irish. Her course on faith and feminism explores the mutual imbrications and antagonisms of faith and feminism, a complex relationship lived by many of our students. One student who took this course said that Kathy shaped her into a better student, Catholic, and woman. More than one of the faculty who wrote about Kathy used the word bravery, underscoring that Kathy is not afraid to take on the toughest questions in the field, and indeed our world. She assembled a working group of 11 scholars and is director of the project Gender, Sex, and Power Toward a History of the Clergy Sex Abuse Crisis in the Catholic Church, which seeks to advance new research on the crisis and its causes, as well as illuminate new understandings of modern Catholicism. Kathy's bravery extends past the walls of academia as she frequently enters public debate and conversation. In a 2018 op-ed in the New York Times, for example, Kathy spoke about how revelations of clergy abuse had shifted her views from being what she called a place-at-the-table feminist who sought gradual change to one aiming to reset the table. She wrote, "We need to rip off the tablecloth, hurl the china against a wall, and replace the crystal with something less ostentatious, more resilient, and for the love of God, safer for children." She's become a go-to voice in public discussions in the New York Times, NPR, the National Catholic Reporter, the Washington Post, the Detroit Free Press, even Fox News, about women and Catholicism, clergy abuse, sainthood, the Pope, and more. Her work as a public intellectual extends her role as a teacher, working to improve the lives of those around her by helping them to see the world in new ways. An admiring student wrote, "I strive to become the type of woman and professional she is." Me too, sister. Me too. Please join me in congratulating Kathleen Sprows Cummings, 2021. Come on up.
Thank you, Pam. Thank you so much. And congratulations to you as the 2020 Sheedy Award winner. We missed the opportunity to have a reception in your honor last year, so this afternoon's one is for you too. I'm absolutely delighted to be in your company, both as a Sheedy Award winner and as a faculty member in gender studies. I can say the same about Jason Ruiz, who's sitting next to you, the 2019 Sheedy awardee, who is my colleague in both gender and American studies. It's been really gratifying to see how widely the publicity surrounding this singular honor has acclaimed my efforts to integrate women and gender into historical narratives. To be honest, this aspect of my teaching has not always garnered universal praise. I think, for example, of a comment I received on one of my teaching evaluations when I first started teaching my Catholics in America class. "I know women were important in the history of the Church, but Professor Cummings seems to think that they have made up half the population." As you know, I was trained in the Department of History, tenured in the Department of American Studies, and I'm now a professor in both. I'm often asked to explain the difference between the two disciplines, and there are a few concrete ways to differentiate the two. American Studies is more visual. It's more consciously interdisciplinary. It's more explicit about positionality. And it's just, well, more. Tellingly, the Department of American Studies uses this meme as a marketing tool. A copy hangs on the office door of Pete Chaika, our director of undergraduate studies. I love being a part of both and would like everyone in the College of Arts and Letters to know the extent to which I embrace this duality. Now, Dean Mastillo already knows this, but let me hasten to clarify that I never actually taught in a getup like this. I wore it to an Oscar party the year Rocketman was nominated for Best Picture. But I show it today because it captures a principle that has long informed my teaching. I never mind looking foolish if it helps me get a point across. Cultivating a sense of humor is particularly important when you're teaching history, a task that I believe is fundamentally dead serious. This has never been more important than in today's America, where so many reduce the study of the past to uncritical celebration of it. This meme began circulating a few years ago in response to fierce debates over the removal of monuments depicting Confederate heroes. Those who suggest that the removal of monuments that reflect the biases of ages past is tantamount to erasing history fail to understand that these kind of representations only tell part of a story. They always oversimplify, and they often distort or omit. I have been fascinated by historical monuments since I was a child, in large part because I grew up not far from Philadelphia's Independence Hall and the other historical markers that commemorate the founding of the United States. I'm grateful to my parents for, among many other things, taking me to see this history very often. We were often accompanied by overseas visitors from our extended family. My maternal grandparents, Tom and Margaret Duffy, were born in Ireland, and because one of my grandmother's sisters migrated from Derry to Manchester, I have a bunch of English cousins as well as Irish ones. The summer I was 10, the visit of two of the former, the English cousins, overlapped with the 4th of July, and caught up, apparently in a patriotic fervor, my siblings and I, in an admittedly juvenile way, we were juveniles in our defense, began to tease them about how our scrappy founding fathers had trounced their stronger, richer empire. My cousins, who were about a decade older than us, responded with genuine bewilderment. That's not the way the war ended at all, they said, going on to explain that, in essence, the king had decided to stop fighting the rebels when he realized that the American colonies were no longer of much financial or strategic use to Britain. My 10-year-old brain exploded. Now, certainly there are more sophisticated debates to be had about the origins and meaning of the American Revolution. But the underlying lesson I learned that day, that long ago day, is delightfully simple. While there are plenty of details about the past that can be verified, dates and names and battles and treaties, interpretations of them vary depending on who is telling the story and what their perspective is. Studying history is an enormously complex endeavor that requires us to sift through mountains of evidence and to include as many voices as possible. Professor Robert Kirby, a professor of history who won the Sheedy Award in 1994, accepted this honor only reluctantly because he believed there was no way to calibrate good teaching or to compare teachers. Insofar as teaching remains a human enterprise, he said in his address, there are as many ways to teach as there are human beings to do it. His technique was to tell more stories and hurl out more details than students can possibly catch, keeping in mind that he was preparing most of his students not for academic life, but for citizenship in the nation and beyond. Maybe, he hoped, the more history tells her stories about compromise and conflict, about decency and fanaticism, politics and war, religion and economics, baseball and slaughter, the more her pupils may enjoy a chance to discover for themselves that choices exist, and that, if they are to be both moral human beings and virtuous citizens, they must, in the end, choose. Unlike Sheedy Award winners Gail Biederman, Father Tom Blance, and Father Bill Miscampbell, who were my teachers long before they were my colleagues and from whom I continue to learn, Robert Kirby was never a formal teacher of mine. Like many doctoral students in history, I occasionally sat in the back row of his famous course on the Civil War to learn and to marvel. Kirby's precisely timed, extraordinarily detailed lectures riveted his audiences. He arrived at the classroom hours early so he could draw meticulous battlefield maps on the blackboard in colored chalk. In fall 1994, my second year in the doctoral program in history here, and my first as a teaching assistant, Kirby visited our teaching seminar led by Gail Biederman to speak on the art of lecturing. I sent him a thank you note. A few days later, I received a 2-page typewritten, heavily footnoted response, along with a copy of his Sheedy address, which he had delivered just a few weeks earlier. Between what I can glean from that letter and from my own memory, it is clear that my thank you note had expressed a measure of discouragement at what I perceived as my failure to engage the students in my discussion sections. I must have written something to the effect of, "Thank you for showing us how not to make history boring." Because that is what he latched onto, offering a decisive corrective. Actually, he wrote, studying the past was often very boring. And our responsibility as teachers was to educate, not to entertain. But he told me not to worry. As I learned more and as I gained more experience, I'd find my own ways of engaging students. Meanwhile, he closed his letter with a piece of advice that heartens me to this day. Don't let yuppie, homogenous, macho ND adolescent ennui get you down. These exchanges constituted the sum total of our epistolary relationship, and I never once had a one-on-one conversation with Professor Kirby. I had not been in touch with him for many years when news of his death last April reached me. I did take the opportunity to introduce myself to his wife, Mary, to tell her how much Kirby's Sheedy address and his letter continue to influence me. And it's part of the reason I was so overwhelmed when Dean Mastillo called me to tell me I was this year's Sheedy Award winner. I actually hung up the phone, I was on South Quad, and I emailed Mary right away to tell her that Bob was the very first person I thought of, and to share with her how humbled I was to share such an honor like this with him. It wasn't long before I received a gracious and wise reply. Mary wrote, "I'm sure it is well merited and that Bob is delighted for you as well. What he would be saying is to trust your own gifts and skills. You have your unique way of teaching just as valuable, he would say more valuable than his. The context and students have changed in the last 25 years, and you have met that challenge. As her husband had done for me a quarter century ago, and as all good teachers do, Mary, who was self-taught for many years at St. Mary's, reminded me that I had a voice, and she encouraged me to use it. She also prompted me to think very seriously, very personally about change over time, which after all is the historian's bread and butter. Notre Dame has changed since 1994. It has become less homogenous, for one thing, and also less macho. I often think how unfathomable it once would have been to work under the leadership of History Department Chair Elizabeth Cole, Dean Mastillo, and Provost Miranda. My approach to teaching does differ substantially from Bob Kirby's, both in content and in style. I couldn't draw a map of a Civil War battlefield to save my life, but I can tell lots of stories about the 600 Catholic sisters who served as army nurses throughout that conflict. And I love to explore with my students the ways memories of the Civil War shaped the American Catholic experience in the 1880s and 1890s, including right here on campus. Absolution Under Fire was painted by Paul Wood in 1891 when he was a 19-year-old student here at Notre Dame. Front and center is Reverend William Kirby, CSC, future president of the university who served as a chaplain in the Civil War. This painting depicts the Battle of Gettysburg, the most decisive day of the Battle of Gettysburg, and it refers to Kirby's blessing of the troops of giving them general absolution. The veracity of this representation is called into question in all sorts of ways. Civil War experts, for example, will explain that the geography is all wrong. The boulder is probably an allusion to Little Big Top. Kirby and the troops were nowhere near that day. It's also very likely that Kirby had been wearing his army uniform as opposed to his clerical habit. Kirby himself claimed to not remember. But like the work of his professor, Luigi Gregori, Paul Wood's art reveals far more about the age in which it was created than it does about the moment it depicts. By imagining a pivotal moment in the American past as a thoroughly Catholic story, Wood was claiming an American identity for Catholics in an age when many argued that their religion disqualified them from U.S. citizenship. When my students and I view Absolution Under Fire up close at the Snite Museum, we have wonderful discussions about the relationship between memory and history and about the relationship between religion and patriotism. The students really resonate with the fact that Paul Wood was about their age when he painted this, and they are moved to find out that he died in a tragic accident less than a year after he completed this. The fact that I have incorporated Wood's painting and the Columbus murals and many other local sites into my classes for many years was the main reason I began to contemplate just a few years ago developing a new course called Notre Dame and America. I thought it wouldn't be all that difficult to do, which just goes to show you that even Sheedy winners make rookie mistakes when it comes to teaching. As you all know, it's never easy to create a new course, even on a subject you think you know well. But I don't have to tell you how gratifying it can be to stretch yourself and about how much you learn about your subject and about the art of teaching when you develop a new course. Notre Dame in America is not structured as an internal history of the university as such, but the story of its evolving place in America, and particularly about the role played by Catholicism, which, as the reason for Notre Dame's founding, was there from the beginning, unlike football, which entered the story much later. This is an image of what football looked like in the 1880s, 1887, the first intercollegiate game. One of the many things I've learned from Father Blance's marvelous new history of the university is the most popular sport on campus at this time was actually marbles. So think about that for a minute. I promised my students on the first day that we will eventually talk about football. I also tell them that I understand many of them enrolled in the course because they love Notre Dame. And that's terrific. But I also tell them that if they expect this course to be about how great Notre Dame is, was, and always will be, this is not the place for them. This is a history course, I say, not a pep rally. Together, we will utilize as many sources as possible to think about how Notre Dame, not unlike America, is many things: a physical location and landscape, a community that both includes and excludes, an institution that has changed a great deal since its founding, a place that aspires to the highest of ideals, and as such has tremendous capacity to inspire, as well as a very real power to disappoint. I tell the students that approaching Notre Dame as scholars does not necessarily mean they will love it any less. If anything, the desire to know a place better and undertaking the necessary work required to do so are themselves expressions of love. One of the assignments that I've used in many courses requires students to research a place on campus. They learn so much from these assignments, especially when they choose a place that means a lot to them. And just like my students, teaching this course has helped me see spaces that I love in new ways. My favorite example of this is the Founders Plaque. You all recognize it. It's installed near the log chapel overlooking St. Mary's Lake, and it's inscribed with an excerpt from a letter Father Sorin wrote to Basil Moreau on December 5th, 1842, soon after he arrived on campus from an arduous journey from southern Indiana. He predicts that the university cannot fail to succeed, and it will become one of the most powerful means for good in this country. We love to quote these words, and no wonder. This is a terrific founding story. I personally love to visit the Founders Plaque, especially in winter, to marvel and give thanks for the audacity of Sorin's vision. But again, monuments only tell part of the story, and because I taught this class, I decided to discover what was behind the ellipses. Published translation of Sorin's original letter to Moreau reveal the words that have been redacted from the monument. As Pam alluded to in her introduction, the first elision invites us to consider what happened before Notre Dame du Lac. It shows us how conscious Notre Dame's founder was, that he was living and learning on the traditional homelands of the Potawatomi people, and invites us to consider how we can acknowledge the same. We also see that Sorin's much vaunted optimism was qualified by the acknowledgement that the venture depended on the near constant flow of money and missionaries across the Atlantic, not only France, but also Ireland and other places. The third and longest elision omits the assumption that sisters would be essential to Sorin's project, as indeed they were. 4 Holy Cross sisters arrived from France as expected in 1843, and many more soon followed, including Mother Mary Ascension, who came to be Father Sorin's second hand. When Mother Ascension died in 1901, mourners eulogized her as the last of Notre Dame's pioneers, who had been, quote, second only to Sorin in achieving the present greatness of Notre Dame. I had never heard of Mother Ascension, nor most of the hundreds of sisters who lived and worked on this campus, not across the street at St. Mary's, same community, but different living places and different kinds of work. I knew nothing about them, the sisters who lived and worked here between 1843 and 1958. And I say this as a person who's been teaching and writing about women's invisibility in historical narratives for 25 years. The highlighted text in the third elision down there foreshadows an epic conflict that ensued not long after the Civil War, when Sorin pressured the Sisters of the Holy Cross to abandon their educational initiatives in favor of focusing exclusively on serving Notre Dame's domestic needs. There is much to admire about Sorin, but he was subject to the same dynamics of gender and power in church and society that many were in the 19th century. I think the main thing I've learned in teaching this course, which I will teach for the 4th time next spring, is that there is always more to learn. One of my go-to final exam questions, which, like so many of the other things that have worked well for me, I cribbed from one of the teachers that I've observed, in this case, my dear friend Colleen Seguin, who teaches at Valparaiso University. On the final exam, my go-to question is, write a letter to Professor Cummings advising her whether or not to assign this book the next time she teaches the course. When they hate a book, these are really fun essays to read. But when they love a book, it can often be profoundly moving, as is the case with this text. The students write about how much this text meant to them about learning about African Americans at Notre Dame from the 1950s until the present in their own words. They learn that that iconic photograph of Father Hesburgh and Martin Luther King linking arms tells one story, and it's a great and important story. But there are other stories about Notre Dame and race, stories about exclusion, stories of people who did not feel welcome. And so my particularly African American students, but not necessarily, talk about how important this book is. But as I've been thinking about what to assign the next time I teach it, I've been thinking about the way the contributors to this book agreed at one point to embrace the identity of Black domers. And I think about how impossible it is to tell the story of the many people who were here and never felt themselves to be members of the Notre Dame family for whatever reason. How do you tell those stories? It's a much harder thing to do. I'm currently worried a great deal about accessibility. As has been clear, I kind of expect my students to trek out to Holy Cross Cemetery, and in one year we climbed up the bell tower, the basilica, and as I've become more conscious of students with different needs, I wonder how to make that more accessible. And here again, I rely on colleagues, I think especially of my junior colleague, Katie Walden, who has helped me think about how to use digital technology and how to make things more accessible. All this is to say that Professor Kirby promised me 27 years ago that I'd get better at teaching, and I guess I have, as I accumulated more experience in the classroom. Even so, I fervently believe that I learned my most valuable lesson about teaching college students outside of a classroom setting. Just over a year after Kirby and I exchanged our letters, I found myself at a crossroads. I had lived for my first 3 years of graduate school with a friend who was in law school. She was graduating, and I was starting my dissertation. While most of the writers in the novels that I read thrived in their solitary apartments, I knew enough about myself that I would not. My solution? Become an assistant rector in a residence hall on campus. In my letter of application to Student Affairs, I couldn't very well say that I wanted to do this as a hedge against my own loneliness. So instead, I wrote that, well, I plan to spend my career teaching undergraduates, and maybe living with them would help me understand them better. It certainly did, though not in the way I anticipated. 3 weeks before I moved into Farley Hall, a rising senior named Patty Quiet was a passenger on TWA 800 when it crashed into the ocean off the coast of Long Island. Patty's death cast a long shadow over the Farley community, especially the seniors, and accompanying them in their grief was just the beginning of 2 years spent walking with residents through sexual assault, through eating disorders, diagnoses of themselves and of loved ones, through addiction. Of course, I also rejoiced with them as they made lifelong friends, as they fell in love, and I talked with them as they discovered who they were and who they wanted to become. It was an enormous privilege, and in the long run, it has helped me avoid what I see as an occupational hazard of college teaching, assuming that our classes are anywhere as close to the center of our students' lives as they are to ours. I make clear to my students that while I have very high expectations for them, nothing, including my class, is more important than their mental health, and I've become more adamant and more explicit about this as the mental health crisis has worsened, and particularly during this pandemic. Some days, when I find myself taking myself a little too seriously, I reroute myself to the west side of Farley Hall, where there's a tree planted in Patty Quiet's memory. Like the art student Paul Wood, Patty never received a Notre Dame degree, but like Wood and like countless others whose names are forgotten to history, who'll never make it into my Notre Dame in America class, Patty was here, and her presence mattered. It's enormously humbling to think about how many have passed through this community that we belong to. To my surprise, I fell in love, when I lived in Farley, with the charming assistant rector of O'Neill Hall. Tom Cummings is sitting in the front row, along with our son, TC, and our younger daughter, Annie. Our eldest, Margaret, is a junior at Loyola University of Chicago. Thomas is the wisest and the funniest person I know, and it's his wisdom and humor that help me do everything, including teaching. He knows better than anyone how much time I put into teaching, and with the possible exception of Kevin Barry from the Canib Center, how much I obsess over negative student comments on evaluations. Mentioning Kevin in the Canib Center reminds me that any success I've had as a teacher depends on so many people. I think of Jean McManus and Rachel Bowman and everyone in university libraries, archives, and special collections, Bridget Hoyt at the Snite Museum, Katie Schlotfeld, all the departmental administrators who helped set up our courses, Shane and Madonna from the Kushwa Center, who cheerfully accept that everything we do revolves around my teaching schedule, the doctoral students who teach me every day, and especially those who have served as teaching assistants in some of my larger classes, the Holy Cross priest, Father Blance especially, who responds respond to my questions, my endless questions, as I seek to understand a little better this university. I think of my students, many of whom are here today. I know there's a big group here from Faith and Feminism, the famous course of spring 2020, what we all went through together. It was a good course anyway, but after the pivot, we really created a wonderful community, and again, helped me grow as a teacher as I struggled to learn new technology. I remember we had a practice session on Zoom with some of the people here. Kirby promised me 27 years ago that I'd get better at teaching, but neither he nor anyone ever promised me it would get easy, and it's not. And so I'd like to end by thanking all of my colleagues from the College of Arts and Letters, who I know work very, very hard to walk into class every day, depending on how prepared we are, how preoccupied we are. This does become for us the most important thing that we do. We teach different subjects, and as Kirby told me, we all have our own unique voices and our all different ways of teaching, but we learn together and we do our very best to do it well. Thank you all for being here, and let's celebrate that we made it through another semester.
Kathy, thank you so much. That was beautiful, inspirational, funny, educational, and impeccably delivered. Thank you for the privilege of listening to your remarks. I want to take this opportunity now to present you first with the plaque. And then with the monetary award. Congratulations. I want to say thanks to Tom and to TC and Annie for being here today. And now is the time when we get to say Happy Advent to all of you, and please join us for food and drink. Congratulations on making it through the semester.